Danny Marchetti hadn't slept in 4 days, and the number on the pink slip in his hand was $76,400. He did the math on the back of a bid he'd already lost, then folded the notice into his shirt pocket like a headstone. Across the diner, Hollis Dean said it loud enough for all 9 of his crew to hear. "Sell me the contracts now, Danny, or the bank hands them to me for free. Either way, I own your name by Christmas." 2 booths over, the temp bookkeeper nobody wanted slid a napkin across the table. 1 corrected figure. 1 line. "I'll fix your books. No ring needed." If you believe love is built with 2 pairs of hands, this story is for you. Subscribe and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The town was called Rowan Creek, and it did not want Nora Vance. That was fine. She did not want much back. She wanted a room with a lock, a job that paid in cash, and a pharmacy within walking distance of both. Rowan Creek had all 3, if you counted the pharmacy on Main that closed at 6 sharp, and the landlord who took first and last without asking why a woman her age had no references. She and Eli had been in the apartment 11 days. Half the boxes were still taped. She left them that way on purpose. You didn't unpack a place you might have to leave in the dark. Eli was 16. He was too tall for his own hands, all wrist and elbow, and he tested his blood sugar at the kitchen table every morning like it was a chore and not a leash. She watched him do it and pretended not to. That was the deal between them. He pretended he didn't need her, and she pretended she believed him. The insulin was the problem. It was always the insulin. She had a shoebox in the closet with the receipts in it. She knew the number without looking. 2 vials was more than the rent. No employer meant no plan. No plan meant retail price. And retail price for a thing that kept your brother alive was a kind of quiet violence nobody in a suit ever had to watch happen at a kitchen table. So she took every job that paid without a paper trail. Bar receipts, a florist's back ledger, and now the diner on 2nd, where the owner kept his books in a literal shoebox and hired her 3 days a week to make the shoebox stop lying to him. She brought her own machine to work. An adding machine. 10 key, green enamel, heavy as a brick. Older than she was. It had been her grandmother's. It smelled faintly of oil and old paper. It printed a tape you could hold in your hand, and Nora trusted a thing she could hold in her hand more than any screen. The crank of the carriage was a sound that settled her. Numbers didn't argue. Numbers didn't recognize your face from a news photo. You fed them in, and they told you the truth, and the truth had no opinion about who you used to be. That was the whole of Nora's ambition now, to be a woman who was good with numbers and known by no one. The trouble was that the diner shared a back office with the man who was drowning 2 booths away. Danny Marchetti hadn't slept in 4 days. You could see it. It sat under his eyes like bruising. He came into the diner most mornings with 9 men and paid for all 9, which Nora noticed because she was the one reconciling the till. And a man who was broke did not usually buy 9 breakfasts. He did it anyway. He did it like a man throwing coins in a fountain he'd already been told was dry. Marchetti Contracting. She'd seen the name on the trucks. She'd seen the paper too, because the diner owner had asked her, as a favor, to glance at Danny's books when Danny finally brought them in a cardboard box held shut with a rubber band. "He's a good man," the owner had said. Like that explained anything. His dad built half this street. Danny's just no good with the desk part. No good was generous. Nora sat with the box for 1 afternoon. She did not need more than that. She fed his numbers into her grandmother's machine and let the tape crawl out, and by the 2nd hour, she knew 3 things about Danny Marchetti that Danny Marchetti did not know about himself. The first was that his outside accountant, a man named Reed Calloway, was competent and overpriced, and had missed something. Not out of laziness, out of assuming. Reed had assumed the material costs were the material costs, because why wouldn't they be, and had built the whole miserable picture on top of that assumption. The second thing was that Danny had, 3 separate times in the last year, bid a job below what it cost him. On purpose. She could see it in the labor hours against the contract price. He'd underbid to help somebody. A widow's roof. A church annex. A ramp for somebody's father. The town had been quietly bleeding him and calling it neighborliness, and Danny had let them. Because a Marchetti did not say no to a neighbor. The third thing was the number on the pink slip he carried, folded in his shirt pocket like a photograph of someone dead. $76,400. A balloon payment on a note his father had taken and Danny had inherited. Due in 31 days. After that, Chapter 7. After that, the trucks would say somebody else's name. Nora knew all of this, and it was none of her business. She was very good at things being none of her business. She had built a life out of it. Then Hollis Dean walked into the diner on a Tuesday and made it loud. Hollis Dean was a developer, which in Rowan Creek meant a man who wore a coat that cost more than a truck and smiled like the check had already cleared. He came in with 2 men who did not eat, and he did not sit. He walked to Danny's booth, where the 9 crew were finishing eggs, and he said it in front of all of them. "Sell me the contracts now, Danny." Loud enough for the counter. Loud enough for Nora. "Sell me the contracts now, or the bank hands them to me for free in a month. Either way, I own your name by Christmas." The diner went quiet the way a room does when everyone decides at once to look at their plates. 9 men who had trusted Danny Marchetti with their mortgages heard another man tell them their boss was already a corpse. Tom's Rivas, the foreman, set down his fork. Just set it down, careful, like it was made of glass. Nobody spoke. And Danny? Nora watched him. Danny did not curse. He did not stand up. He took the pink slip out of his shirt pocket, and he looked at it, and he folded it once more along a crease already gone soft, and he put it back over his heart like he was tucking in a headstone. "Not for sale," he said. Quiet, steady in the way of a man holding steady, because the alternative is to fall down. "Not today, Hollis. Month from now, then." Hollis buttoned his coat. "You'll call me. They always call me." He left. The bell over the door rang like nothing had happened. The 9 men looked at Danny, and Danny looked at his coffee, and Nora looked at the tape still curled in her hand with the truth on it. And she did the thing she had promised herself she would never do again. She got involved. She tore the bottom off the tape. She wrote one figure on a paper napkin, in pencil, in the small square hand she'd been taught in a life she no longer admitted to. Then she got up, and she crossed the diner, and she set the napkin down in front of Danny Marchetti next to his cold eggs. He looked at it. He looked at her. He had no idea who she was. To him, she was the temp with the antique calculator. The city woman nobody in Rowan Creek could place, 2 booths over, and none of his concern. "What's this?" he said. "Not really a question. It's what your material cost should be," she said. "That's the real number. The one you're paying is bigger by about that much a month. Your accountant didn't catch it because he assumed the supplier was honest. I don't assume that about anybody." Danny stared at the napkin. His jaw worked. She could see him not wanting to hope, because hope had been expensive lately. "You went through my books. Frank asked me to. I'm sorry. I do it fast." She almost turned away. She should have turned away. Instead, she heard herself keep going, because Eli's insulin was in the shoebox and the rent was Friday, and a woman who was drowning could sometimes recognize the sound of somebody else going under. "You can't pay me. I already looked at your ledger. I know you can't. But I can fix this. All of it. The books, the leak, the plan the bank needs to see. I'll fix your books. I can't afford no ring needed," she said. It came out before she decided to say it. It landed wrong and right at the same time, and the crew heard it, and somebody made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, and Danny Marchetti finally looked up at her like she was a person and not a rumor. "What did you say?" but she was already walking back to her booth. She left the napkin. She left the number. She let him sit with it. Cut. That was all she gave him that day. He came to find her that night. She was not surprised. She'd left the door open on purpose, in a manner of speaking. A man that far down does the math on a napkin over and over until he can't stand it. And then he goes looking for the woman who wrote it. He knocked on the diner's back door at 7, after close, when she was the only one there. Machine humming. Tape crawling. She let him in. He stood in the doorway too big for it, hat in his hands. A contractor who had never in his life stood in a doorway, not knowing whether he was welcome. "I need you to explain that number," he said, "the one on the napkin. Because if it's real, it's real. Then somebody's been robbing me for a year, and I've been thanking them for the invoices." "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what's been happening." He sat down without being asked. He looked at her machine, the green enamel, the tape. "My grandmother had one of those. Everybody's grandmother had one of these. They're better than the new ones. They only do one thing and they don't lie about it." Something in his face moved. Just barely. It was the first time in 4 days a thing had gone right in front of him, and he didn't trust it yet. "I can't pay you," he said. "You know that. You've seen the box. I've got 31 days, and I've got nothing." "I know." Nora shut off the machine. The silence after it was large. "So let me tell you what I actually want, and you can tell me I'm out of my mind." And she told him. She told him plain, the way she told numbers. That she had a brother, 16, diabetic, and that the insulin was going to kill them, not by killing him, but by bleeding the two of them dry a vial at a time. That she had no employer and no plan because she couldn't afford to be on anybody's books. That she needed one thing from the world of respectable people that she couldn't get on her own. A job with insurance attached to it. And a reason for that job that nobody would look at twice. And she told him what she'd found in the box that wasn't in the numbers. A letter, half buried, from a trust. A homestead line. $95,000 set aside by his grandfather in the 70s. Under a clause so old-fashioned it was almost funny. It only released to an heir who was, in the language of 1971, married and settled. "My Aunt Marguerite's the trustee," Danny said slowly. "She's been throwing that in my face since Dad died." "Get married, Danny. Settle down, Danny. Then the money's yours, and you can save the company." Like it's that simple. "It could be that simple," Nora said. He understood then. She watched it arrive on his face, and she watched him hate it. "You're talking about a paper. Not a marriage. A paper." She kept her voice flat, kept it a ledger. "You marry me. On paper. That unlocks your grandfather's line, 95,000, which covers the balloon and then some. And it puts me and Eli on your company's insurance, which is the only reason I'd ever do a thing this stupid. I fix your books, really fix them, so the company survives past the loan. 6 months. Separate rooms. Then a quiet split. No drama. And I move on to the next town, and you keep your father's name." Danny sat with it a long time. The tape hung between them off the edge of the machine, curling, and neither of them touched it. "That's insane," he said finally. "It's math," she said. "You've got a crisis, and I've got a crisis, and they happen to fit together. That's all a good deal ever is. 2 problems that cancel. People will talk. People always talk. Let them talk about a wedding instead of a bankruptcy." He almost smiled at that. Almost, then his face closed again, and she saw the real objection. The one underneath the others. "I don't take help," he said. "I sink honest before I float on somebody else's back. That's not pride. It's pride," Nora said. "It's exactly pride. And your pride is about to put 9 men out of work 3 weeks before Christmas. Tom's Revis has a kid. I saw the withholding. You want to be a good man on the way down, Danny. That's your business. But you're taking 9 families with you, and my brother's insulin doesn't care how honest you feel about it." That landed. She'd meant it to. It was cruel, and it was true, and those were often the same thing. He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in her that made him not ask the question a smarter man would have asked, which was, "Who are you? And why does a woman who can do this in an afternoon need to hide in a diner?" He didn't ask it. Later she would understand that he didn't ask because he was too tired and too drowning. And she was grateful. And she filed the not asking away as a debt she owed him. "One thing," she said, before he could answer. She said it lightly. "The way you set down a card you don't want examined. I don't file taxes anymore. Long story. Doesn't matter for this. The paper marriage doesn't need my return, just my signature. And the bookkeeping's clean, I promise. That part I'd never lie about. Not the books. The books are the one thing I'm honest about all the way down." He nodded like it was nothing. It was nothing to him, that night. He had 31 days and a napkin with the truth on it. "Okay," Danny Marchetti said. "Just that. Okay. Like signing a bid." They did the paper 2 days later at her kitchen table. Not a courthouse yet. That came the following week, quick and gray. A clerk and a witness pulled off the sidewalk. This was the agreement between them. The real one. The one that mattered more than the license, because it laid out what they were and what they weren't. She'd typed it herself. Plain. 6 months. Separate rooms. She fixes the books. He unlocks the line. Eli goes on the insurance the first of the month. A quiet dissolution at the end. No claim on either side. No ring. No pretense past what Marguerite and the bank required to see. Eli was in his room with the door mostly shut, which meant he was listening. He'd said one thing about it, earlier. "Lo, you're marrying a guy to get me on his insurance." And she'd said, yes, because she didn't lie to Eli. And he'd looked at her a long time, and then said, "That's the most Nora thing I've ever heard," and gone into his room. That was as close to a blessing as she was going to get. Danny came at 7, in a clean shirt, which touched her in a way she didn't want to examine. He'd shaved. A man about to enter a fake marriage had shaved for it. She put the thought away. They sat across the table. She put her grandmother's machine between them, off to the side, out of habit, and it sat there squat and green through the whole thing like a chaperone that had seen worse. He read every line. He was slow at the desk part, he'd said so himself, but he read every line, and she respected that. He stopped at the separate rooms clause, and something crossed his face. Not disappointment. She told herself, just a man confirming the shape of a thing. 6 months, he said. 6 months. And you fix it. All of it. Not just enough to draw the loan. You actually fix it so it stands after you're gone. That's the only kind of fixing I do. He signed. His signature was a contractor signature. Blunt, all downstrokes. She signed under it in her small square hand. The hand from the other life. And for 1 second she was afraid he'd recognize something in the way she made her letters. He didn't. Why would he? He set the pen down and looked at the 2 names on the paper. Married and settled in the eyes of a dead man's trust. And he let out a breath he'd probably been holding for a month. "Well," Danny said, "that's the strangest thing I've ever done." "Give it a week," said Nora. The office moved into the job trailer on Monday. It was a construction trailer parked at the edge of the Delano site, the biggest of the 3 jobs Danny had left, and it was cold in a way that got into your spine. Nora set up in the back corner with her machine and the cardboard box, and a space heater that tripped the breaker if you ran it, and the coffee pot at the same time. The crew came through for their time cards and looked at her machine and made the joke she'd known they'd make. "That thing's steam-powered? You crank it to start it?" My grandma had one of them in the Depression. She let them. She'd learned a long time ago that men who mock you are men who haven't decided about you yet, and the ones to worry about were the ones who were polite. Tom's Rivas was polite. Tom's watched her with the flat, careful eyes of a man whose kid's Christmas rode on whether the city woman was a con or a lifeline, and she didn't blame him one bit. She earned it the first week, without saying a word about it. 6 months of Danny's job cost records were simply gone. Not lost, never made. Danny built beautifully and tracked nothing. He'd carried the numbers in his head the way his father had, and his father was dead, and the head numbers had died with the ability to sleep. To restructure anything, a bank would need to see where the money had actually gone, job by job, and there was nowhere. There was a box of receipts and a man's memory running on fumes. So Nora rebuilt it. One night, mostly, she stayed in the trailer past dark, with the space heater ticking and the machine cranking and the tape pooling on the floor like a paper river, and she reconstructed 6 months of a company from receipts and delivery slips and the ghosts of numbers, cross-checking every job against the labor she could infer from the time cards. By 2 in the morning, she had it. All of it. The company laid open on tape, honest, for the first time since the old man died. And in it, she found the 3 jobs Danny had bid at a loss on purpose. The widow, the church, the ramp. She'd suspected from the diner box. Now she could prove it to the dollar. He'd eaten the cost of being kind 3 times and never told anyone, and it had helped push him to the edge he was standing on. She found something else, too. She set it aside. She wasn't ready to be sure yet. But the material costs were wrong in a way that wasn't Danny's kindness and wasn't Reed's assumption. They were wrong like a wound is wrong. She was still working when Danny came back at some ungodly hour to get a set of prints he'd forgotten. He found her in her coat, gloved fingers on the 10 key, breath faintly visible, and he stopped in the doorway. "You're freezing," he said. "I'm fine." The heater trips the breaker. He didn't argue. He didn't offer to buy a better heater they both knew he couldn't afford. He went away, and she thought that was the end of it, and then 20 minutes later he was back with a roll of weather stripping and a utility knife, and without a word he knelt at the trailer window where the draft came through, and he fitted it. Careful, the way he did everything with his hands, sealing the cold out of the one corner of the world where she was sitting. He didn't say anything about it. Neither did she. But the draft stopped, and the trailer got, by 1 degree, less cruel, and Nora looked at the back of his neck while he worked, and had to put her eyes back on the tape. That was the first one. She wouldn't have called it that yet. But it was. The bank was where it got public. Danny had to bring the restructuring conversation to the bank, and the bank meant a loan officer named Pruitt and a conference room with a long table. And it also meant, because Rowan Creek was small and Hollis Dean made it his business, that Hollis was in the building. He came into the meeting uninvited, the way money does, and he brought Marguerite with him, not on his side exactly, but drawn along in his wake, the trustee of the homestead line, there to see with her own eyes whether her nephew's sudden marriage was real. Aunt Marguerite was 70 and upright, and wore her disapproval like good jewelry. She looked at Nora the way you look at a stain on a tablecloth you inherited. Pruitt laid it out gently, and it was still humiliating. The marriage was 3 weeks old. The bride was from out of town, no local references, and the timing, Pruitt did not say the word convenient, but the word sat in the room. And then Hollis, leaning back, arms wide, said the thing out loud that everyone else had the decency to only think. "You married a stranger to dodge me?" He laughed, delighted. He looked at Marguerite when he said the rest, performing for the trustee. "That's rich, Danny, that's desperate. I'll own you and the wife by spring, and she'll be the last bad decision you ever signed." The room went the way the diner had gone. Quiet, everyone's eyes finding the table. Nora had been called worse in bigger rooms. She kept her face flat and her hands still, and prepared to weather it, because weathering it was what she did. It was the whole skill of her life now. But Danny stood up. He didn't plan it. She could tell he didn't plan it. His chair scraped back like his body had decided before he had. He put himself half a step in front of her, between her and Hollis, and it was a small thing and an involuntary thing, and it changed the temperature of the room. "You don't talk about her," Danny said. Quiet, that drowning, steady quiet. You can circle my company like a buzzard, Hollis. That's business. I can't stop you. But you don't talk about her. Not in front of me. Hollis blinked. He recovered fast. He always did. But he'd been surprised, and everyone saw it, and Marguerite saw it most of all. Saw her broke nephew stand up for the mystery wife with something in his voice that was not pride and was not paper. Nora sat very still behind him and did not know what to do with her face. Marguerite Marchetti drew her own conclusions, and they made everything harder. She cornered Nora in the hall after, cane tapping, and she was not cruel about it, which was worse. I don't know what you are, Marguerite said. But my father's money doesn't move for a courthouse signature and a story. That clause says married and settled. Settled, if you want the homestead line, I'll want to see a marriage, dinners, the church at Christmas, the whole town watching the two of you and believing it. If it's real, prove it. If it's paper, I'll know, and I'll sit on that money till the bank takes the trucks. So the paper marriage had to be performed. That was the price, not just signed, worn, in front of a town that already whispered. Nora, who had crossed 3 states to be invisible, now had to be visible on purpose. On Danny's arm, at church, at dinner. Believable, it should have been unbearable. Some of it was. But there was the night she came out to the trailer early and found her grandmother's machine sitting on her desk with its carriage moving smoothly for the first time in 10 years. The carriage had jammed on a burr years back. She'd learned to work around it, half cranking, cursing it. Someone had taken it apart in the night. Someone had oiled the shaft and filed the burr and set every key true and put it back together and left it running clean and left no note, because a note wasn't the point. She stood there in the cold trailer with her coat still on, and she cranked the carriage once, twice, smooth as water, and her throat did something unfamiliar and unwelcome. He'd taken it apart in the dark and fixed the one thing she loved that she thought couldn't be fixed. He hadn't said a word. He'd just understood, without being told, that the machine was her grandmother and her honesty, and the last true thing she owned, and he'd made it right and walked away. She did not thank him. She couldn't, without saying more than she could afford to say. But the next day she left half her sandwich on his desk. Because she'd noticed by then, she noticed everything. It was the curse of her eyes, that Danny Marchetti didn't eat lunch anymore. He was stretching the cash. 9 breakfasts he'd buy, but for himself, at noon, nothing. So the payroll would go 1 more week. Nobody else had caught it. She caught it. So half her sandwich went on his desk, wrapped, no note, because a note wasn't the point, and she watched from the corner of her eye until he ate it, degree by degree. Neither of them named the temperature. The leak was what changed everything. She'd set it aside that first night, the wrongness in the material costs. Now, with 6 months rebuilt and the numbers clean, she went back to it. Because a forensic eye can't leave a wound alone. Marchetti's material costs were impossible. Not high. Impossible. She pulled the invoices from Keller Supply, the lumber and concrete and hardware, and she laid them against the delivery slips, and she cranked it all through the machine slow, and the tape told her the truth the way it always did. Double billed. Not once. Systematically, loads billed that the delivery slips didn't match. A yard of concrete here, a lift of studs there, small enough that a busy contractor grieving his father would never catch it, steady enough that over a year it added up to a bleed that had helped put Danny 31 days from the grave. The margin hadn't been lost to bad luck or bad bidding. Someone had been skimming Marchetti contracting 1 invoice at a time. And Keller Supply, she pulled the thread. And the thread went where she'd started to fear it would. Keller's parent holding, buried 2 layers down in a filing she almost couldn't get from a town this size, traced to the same money that fed Hollis Dean. It wasn't a coincidence that Hollis was circling. Hollis had been strangling the company with one hand through his supplier and offering to buy the corpse cheap with the other. The buzzard had been poisoning the animal. She sat with the tape a long time, alone in the trailer, the heater ticking, the weather stripping holding the cold at bay. Reed Calloway, the outside accountant, had come around that week. Polite, decent, conventional. A good man in a pressed shirt. He'd figured out she was the real bookkeeper now, and instead of resenting it, he'd warmed to it, and he'd asked her to dinner in a careful, hopeful way that told her exactly what kind of man he was. The safe kind. The kind a sensible woman married. He'd also told her, kindly, to stay out of the supplier business. Don't go poking Keller, Reed had said. Whatever's there, it's above your pay grade, and it'll follow you. He'd meant it as care. He didn't know how right he was, or what it would follow her back to. She'd said no to the dinner. She'd known exactly why, and the why had a weather-stripped window and an oiled carriage in it. And she'd hated herself a little for the knowing. Now she sat with proof that Hollis Dean had been robbing the man she'd married on paper. And she had a choice. She could report it, quietly, from a safe distance, and let it grind through whatever passed for justice in Rowan Creek while the clock ran out. That was the smart move. That was the invisible move. That was the Nora Vance move. See the fraud, document the fraud, hand the fraud to someone else, and be 3 states gone before anyone connected her name to it. Or, she looked at the balloon date on the wall. 11 days left now. She looked at the half a sandwich she'd left him. Gone. She looked at her grandmother's machine, running clean because a tired man had fixed it in the dark and never mentioned it. Nora Vance stood up. She gathered the invoices. She gathered the delivery slips that didn't match them. She gathered the tape with the whole ugly truth crawling down it in her small, square hand. And she put on her coat, and she did not call anyone. And she did not send it to anyone safe. She drove to Keller Supply herself. Keller Supply sat off the county road behind a chain-link fence. Nora parked. She sat a moment with her hands on the wheel. Then she took the folder and went in. The counterman looked up. Behind him, through a glass door, sat the manager. His name was on the door. Nora walked past the counterman like she belonged there and opened the door without knocking. "You're going to want to hear me out," she said, "before you call anyone." The manager was a heavy man with a soft voice. He told her to sit. She didn't. She laid the invoices on his desk, one at a time. Then the delivery slips, beside each one. The paper made a small sound against the wood. 1,100 board feet. Billed, she said. She touched the invoice. Then she touched the slip. 600 delivered, signed for by your own driver. This one, 500 board feet, billed at 1,100 again. Same job, same week. She kept going. She had a year of them. She did not raise her voice once. The manager's face did a slow thing. It went from patient to careful to still. "Marchetti's a good account," he said finally. "Marchetti's a bled account," Nora said. "Somebody's been skimming margin off a dying man for a year, and I know who signs your parent company's checks." She said the name. She said it plainly, like a figure off a tape. Hollis Dean. The soft-voiced man didn't blink, and the not blinking told her everything. She'd read 100 men across 100 desks. She knew the look of a man deciding how much of someone else's fire he was willing to stand in. "I'm not here to burn you," Nora said. "I'm here for restitution. You cut a credit memo today for the overcharge, and I walk out, and this stays a billing error. Or I take these to the state, to Marchetti's bank, and to every other contractor you've been shaving. And your name's on the door, not his." $76,400. She named it. The exact figure. The balloon to the dollar, because she'd built the number backward from the tape until the fraud and the debt were the same size. And that symmetry was the only leverage she'd ever needed. He wrote the memo. His hand shook a little at the end. He signed it and slid it across, and she folded it once and put it in her coat, and she said thank you, because her grandmother had raised her to. She drove back with the window down. The cold felt clean. She did not feel invisible anymore. She found she didn't miss it. The creditors' meeting was in the bank's back room. Fluorescent light. A long table. Pruitt from the bank at the head, his glasses down his nose. Marchetti in her good coat, her hands folded like a woman at church. Tom's and two of the crew stood along the wall because there weren't enough chairs. And Hollis Dean sat easy in the middle of it, one ankle on one knee, like a man who'd already read the last page. Danny had the corrected books. Nora had walked him through every line the night before, at the kitchen table, the adding machine between them, and he'd looked at her over the tape with something she'd told herself was gratitude. Danny stood up to speak. He got as far as the restitution memo. That was when Hollis smiled. "Before we go further," Hollis said, and his voice was almost gentle, "I think the room should know who did these books." He set a folded newspaper on the table. He smoothed it flat with one hand. "Vance," he said. "Nora Vance. Some of you might have missed it, being out here. Big firm, back in the city. Cooked a fraud so bad they pulled her license. It's public record. There's a filing with her name on it." He looked around, patient, letting it land. "That's your honest bookkeeper, Danny. That's who fixed your numbers. A woman the state won't let sign a tax return." The room went quiet in that particular way. Marguerite's hands unfolded. Pruitt took off his glasses. And Danny turned and looked at Nora, and for 1 second, one bad second, she watched the doubt move across his face like weather. "Is that true?" he said, low just to her. "The license," she said. "Yes, the books." His voice cracked on it. "Are the books real, Nora? That's the one thing. You said that's the one thing you'd never—" "They're real," she said. But he'd already said it out loud, in front of the room, the doubt, and she saw it hit him a half second after it left his mouth, saw him want it back. Too late. Some things you can't unsay at a long table under bad light. Pruitt said the plan was frozen. Pending review. Marguerite said the name. She said the name like it was a plate she was setting down carefully. The name couldn't be attached to this, not now, not with a filing. She was sorry. She looked like she was. Nora stood up. She didn't defend herself. That was the thing Danny would turn over later. For days. She had a folder that could have. She had the whole true story right there, in her bag. The appeal. The vindication on the facts. She said none of it. "You'll make the balloon on the restructuring," she told Danny. Quiet, only to him. "The numbers hold without me in the room. That's the point of honest numbers. Anybody can read them." Then she picked up her coat. She did not pick up the adding machine. She left it on the table, her grandmother's green machine, and beside it she left one last strip of tape. The true numbers running down it in her small square hand, and she walked out past the men standing along the wall, and Tom stepped back to let her by, and didn't quite meet her eyes. And she got in her car, and she drove home to Eli, and she started, out of 40 years of habit, to pack. Danny nearly signed. Hollis had the papers out before Nora's car left the lot. A clean sale. The contracts, the name, all of it for the assumption of the balloon, and a number that would keep the lights on for a season. Danny sat with the pen. 4 days without sleep, and now this. His father's company on a Tuesday afternoon under a light that hummed. "It's the smart move," Hollis said. "You keep your dignity. You don't go bankrupt. Sign, and it's done." Danny put the pen to the line. Tom's put his hand flat on the paper. "No," Tom said. Danny looked up. The two other men had come off the wall. Behind them, in the doorway, the rest of the 9, who'd driven over when word went around, filling the hall. "You sign that," Tom said, "and every promise your old man ever made these men, you sign that away too." He didn't move his hand. That woman. The city woman with the toy calculator. "You want to know what she is, Danny? She's the only honest person who ever touched those books. Reed missed it for a year. Getting paid to miss it, maybe. She found it in a night. And she just walked out of here and left you the answer on a piece of paper and asked for nothing." He looked at Hollis, then back. "Don't you dare tell me she's the crook in this room." Danny took the pen off the line. Hollis stopped smiling then. For the first time all afternoon, Danny went home. Not to the trailer. to the county courthouse first, the next morning, when the clerk's window opened, and he asked for the record. The whole record. He read it standing up at the counter because he couldn't wait to sit. He read for an hour. It wasn't what Hollis had said. It was almost the opposite of what Hollis had said. Nora Vance hadn't cooked the fraud. Nora Vance had found it. She'd found it inside her own firm, a partner running a client's money through shell accounts. And she'd written it up, all of it, the way she wrote everything up, plainly in figures, impossible to argue with. And the firm had turned on her. They had the money, and the lawyers, and the standing, and she had a spreadsheet, and the truth, and they'd buried her under it. Suspended her license pending an appeal she'd never been able to afford to fight. Vindicated on the facts. Ruined on the paper. The exact shape of the thing she'd just done for him, run in reverse a year ago, and it had cost her everything. I don't file taxes anymore. Long story. Danny stood at the counter and understood the long story. He drove to the trailer. The adding machine was gone. No, it was on his desk. He'd carried it back himself and couldn't remember doing it. He fed the tape through his fingers. Every figure. He'd spent 6 months of Danny's job cost records being lied to by better-dressed men, and here in his hand was 600 board feet of truth, adding up, clean, twice checked. He ran the numbers himself, by hand, 2 layers down, the way she'd taught him without either of them calling it teaching. Everyone held. He didn't call her. He wasn't sure he had the right yet. He called Pruitt instead, and Marguerite, and he asked for one more meeting, the real one, and he told them what he was bringing, and Pruitt was quiet on the line a long moment, and then said, "Bring it." The second meeting had more chairs. Danny didn't lead with the newspaper. He led with the books. He laid the corrected P&L on the table, and he laid the Keller restitution memo beside it. $76,400. Credited, signed, the fraud made whole. Somebody in this room, Danny said, has been double billing me through Keller Supply for a year. Not bad luck, not the market. Theft, and she caught it. He set the invoices down. The billed against the delivered. 1,100. 600. He walked the room through it exactly the way she'd walked him. And he was not a numbers man. And that was why it worked. Because if Danny Marchetti could follow it, anyone could. Pruitt followed it. Pruitt put his glasses back on and followed it all the way down. Invoice to slip to the parent company on the letterhead. And then Pruitt looked up over the top of the glasses, and he looked at exactly one person. "Mr. Dean," Pruitt said, "Keller Supply's parent holding. That's your signature on the incorporation, isn't it?" The room turned. All of it at once. The way a field turns in wind. Hollis had come to bury a bookkeeper. He hadn't come ready to be read. "That's a reach," he said, and it came out thinner than he meant it. "You're taking the word of a woman who—" "I'm taking the word of the delivery slips," Pruitt said, "signed by your own drivers. The woman didn't write those. Your drivers did." He set them down one by one, and each one was a small flat sound in a very quiet room. "The liens you were going to use to take this company. They point the other way now, Mr. Dean. They point at you." Hollis stood up. He buttoned his jacket. It was a gesture that had worked for him his whole life, the standing, the buttoning, the room following him out. Nobody followed him out. He looked at the door, and he looked at the table, and the arrogance drained off his face in real time, slow, like water finding the low place, and he said something about lawyers, and nobody answered him, and he left alone. The door didn't even slam. It just clicked. Then Marguerite Marchetti opened her purse. She took out a letter. The paper was old. 3 weeks old was Eli, and this was older than any of them, gone yellow at the folds, and she held it in 2 hands. "My father left 2 letters," she said. Her voice was not a church voice now. It shook, a little, and she let it. "One I read to you the day the trust was written. The homestead line. $95,000 to a married and settled heir. I've held that line over this boy's head for 8 weeks because I thought that's what my father wanted. Propriety. The name. She looked down at the second letter. He left this one sealed. To be opened, he wrote. Only if the first one ever came to stand in the way of the work. I never thought it would. I was wrong about a great many things. She read it out loud. Her father's hand from 1971. The homestead line was never for whoever married well. It was for whoever loved the work enough to save it. A house is not the walls. It's the hands that keep it standing. Give it to them. Married or not, ringed or not, give it to whoever stays when it would be easier to go. Marguerite folded it. She looked up. And she did not look at Danny. She looked at the empty chair, where a green adding machine had sat 2 days before, and then she looked at Danny, and she said, "The line is released. Unconditionally, to whoever saved this work." She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 50 years. I believe we all know who that was. Danny stood up. His voice wasn't steady either. "I'm not drawing my grandfather's loan to look married," he said. He said it to the whole room. I read that clause for 8 weeks like it was the only door out, and it wasn't a door, it was a leash. "I'm not taking a marriage loan. I'll pay every one of you back a nail at a time if I have to." He put his hand flat on the corrected books. "These are the only honest thing in this building. A woman the state took a license from, for telling the truth, which some of you can go read at the courthouse like I did. She fixed them and asked for nothing, and I doubted her out loud at this table. And I'll carry that. But I'm not going to compound it by taking the coward's money." He looked at Pruitt. "Her restructuring. The honest one. That's the plan. Yes or no?" Pruitt looked at the numbers one more time. He didn't need to. He was a bank man, and the numbers were good, and good numbers are good numbers. "Yes," Pruitt said. Reed Calloway was in the room. The safe man, the good second suitor, in a pressed shirt. He'd come to help and found there was nothing left to help with. When it broke up, he crossed to Danny and put out his hand. "I missed it," Reed said, no bitterness in it. That was the decency in him, the thing Nora had seen and turned down. A year of invoices, and I assumed they were honest because honest men wrote them. She assumed nothing. That's the whole difference between us, and it's the difference that matters. He shook Danny's hand. "She's the real thing. Don't be a fool twice." Then Toms and the crew did the thing that Danny didn't ask for and couldn't have asked for. They were still 4 days out from the balloon, even with the restitution, even with the plan. There was a gap. A short one, but a balloon payment doesn't care that a gap is short. Toms had done the math on the drive over. 9 men. 2 weeks' pay each, deferred. It closed the gap with room to spare. "We talked about it in the truck," Tom said, like it was nothing, like it wasn't 9 families. 2 weeks. We can eat 2 weeks. What we can't eat is Hollis Dean owning the sign over the door your dad hung. He shrugged. "The jobs are ours. Seems right we're the ones that saved them." The balloon cleared 4 days early. $76,400, made on time by the men whose time it bought. And when it cleared, the marriage on paper became a marriage the insurance company recognized. And Eli's coverage went from a shoebox of receipts to a card in a wallet. And somewhere a pharmacy stopped being a monthly act of terror. Danny drove to the house that night, not the trailer. Nora's little rented house, where the light was on in the kitchen. She'd packed. 2 boxes by the door. She hadn't left. She kept telling herself she was leaving, and she kept not leaving, and she'd stopped trying to explain it to herself around the second box. He knocked. She opened it. He didn't have a speech. He'd had one in the truck and it was gone. "I read the record," he said. "The whole thing. I know what you did. I know what it cost you." He stopped. Started over. "I doubted you out loud in front of the whole town and you didn't defend yourself. And I've been trying to figure out why. And I think it's because you decided a long time ago that nobody would. So you got good at going first, leaving before they could. He looked at the boxes. You're not leaving, Nora, not because of a leash, because I'm asking you to stay, and there's no clause in it, no trust, no paper. I refused the paper. I told a room full of people I'd pay them back a nail at a time before I'd fake being married to you. He almost laughed. Turns out I didn't want to fake it. Danny, I don't have the ring on me, he said. It's back at the trailer. I fixed the last key on your grandmother's machine. The 4 stuck, you never said, but it stuck. And I put the ring in the tray. Come get your machine. That's all I'm asking. Come get your machine and see what's in the tray. She went. The trailer window was weather-stripped, and the carriage was oiled, and the 4 key that had stuck for a year moved clean now under her finger. In the tray, where the coin tray would be, sat a plain ring. Not much of a ring. A working man's idea of a ring, which is to say the best he could do and no pretending otherwise. No paper this time, Danny said. No ring needed, you told me that first night. I need it. That's the difference between us, I guess. You always did the math on what you could live without. He took a breath. I'm asking you to do the math on what you don't have to. She didn't say Ms. or Mr. or Marchetti or any of the ledger distance words she'd hidden behind for a year. Danny, she said. Just his name. And then, yes. 8 months later, the tape came up in the black. Nora fed it through her fingers to be sure. Because she was always sure, but she liked to be sure twice, and there it was. The first profitable month. The number at the bottom with no minus in front of it for the first time since a man's father died 2 winters back. She tore the tape off. 3 words she wrote across it in pencil, in her small square hand, and Danny framed it, and it hung on the trailer wall over her desk where the balloon date used to hang. In the black. They were married on a job site. Not a metaphor, an actual job site. The one Danny's father had never finished. A house the crew had rebuilt on their off hours into a home with real walls and a weather-stripped window in every room. Because Tom's had made a joke about it once and then made sure of it. The town that had judged the broke contractor and the mystery bookkeeper at a long table under bad light stood in that finished house and toasted them. And some of the ones who'd whispered loudest cried the hardest, which is how it usually goes. Eli was best man. 16, healthy, tall now, the diabetes just a schedule instead of a sentence. Insulin in the fridge and a card in a wallet and no shoebox anywhere in the house. He gave a speech that was mostly about his sister and only a little about Danny. And that was right. And Danny knew it was right and grinned the whole way through it. Marguerite came. She'd released the homestead line, and Danny had used exactly none of it. And she'd said that was the most Marchetti thing she'd ever seen, and meant it as the highest thing she knew how to say. Reed sent a card. It was a kind card. He was a kind man. He was never the choice, and he knew it before Danny did, and there was no bitterness in any of it, which is its own small grace. Hollis Dean was not there. The liens he'd built pointed his own way now, and there were lawyers, the way he'd promised. Only they were his, and they were busy. Nobody at the wedding said his name. That was the cleanest revenge of all. A whole day, a whole house, and not one person thought of him. A certified letter came the week before the wedding. Nora almost didn't open it. She knew the weight of a certified envelope, had learned to fear it. She opened it standing at the counter the way Danny had read the court record, unable to wait to sit. Her appeal had won. On the facts, the way it was always going to, if anyone had ever had the money to make them look. Vance, CPA, restored. She could sign a tax return again. She could be, on paper, the thing she'd been in truth the whole time. She stood there with the letter, and she thought about the old habit, the reflex, the 2 boxes by the door, 3 states and a new name, and gone before anyone connected her to anything. The letter said she was free to go be that woman again, cleaned up, licensed, invisible. She folded it. She put it in the drawer, next to the framed tape's twin, and she did not pack a box. She went out to the trailer where a green 10-key adding machine ran clean on every key, and a man who'd almost signed the wrong paper was arguing with a supplier over a delivery slip, checking it against the invoice himself now, out loud, the way she'd taught him. And she stood in the doorway a second before he saw her. Some things are built with two pairs of hands. She'd known that about houses her whole life, and never once let herself believe it about anything else. She let herself. Now, comment the city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this one traveled.